Radio Espial. We explore and discover together.
Welcome to Radio Espial. It's 2018. This is our first episode of this year, episode 7, and we've a great show lined up for you. Off we go. Very welcome to Radio Espial. We're talking Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 tonight. As always, we have a guest. It's Grace Nathan, a relative of a passenger on board, her mother. We'll be talking to her shortly, and we'll be catching up on the latest news on MH370.
We explore and discover together.
Okay, you're all very welcome to Radio Espial. You can catch us on www.radioespial.com. We're available on other social media outlets, at Radio Espial on Twitter, and also backslash on Facebook, Radio Espial. As I said, we have a great guest coming up for you. It's a guest I've wanted to interview for a little time, and was a very appropriate week. Of course, as I've said, our subject is missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Just for any new listeners and people watching this wherever on YouTube or iTunes or wherever in video, in podcast form, just a quick update. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was a scheduled international passenger flight that disappeared on March the 8th, 2014 while flying from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia, to Beijing Capital International Airport in China. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200ER operated by Malaysia Airlines. It last made air traffic contact over the South China Sea shortly before entering Vietnam airspace, where it was intended to make contact and never did. And that occurred 40 minutes after takeoff. Malaysian military say they did track the aircraft as it deviated westwards over the Malay Peninsula. It left the range of military aircraft around about 2:22 a.m. northwest of Penang. That's northwestern Malaysia. The aircraft carried 12 Malaysia crew members and 227 passengers from 15 nations. And of course, our guest tonight is Grace Nathan, and her mother was on that flight. And we're going to talk to her shortly. But what I want to do is bring you up to date with the latest news that occurred on Wednesday this week. And to do that, following a more than 3 year search over 120,000 square kilometre search area that turned up nothing. We have had some positive news in recent days. So let's first of all pick up on that news, and as soon as we hear the Malaysian Transport Minister Leo speak, we're going to go straight then to the interview with Grace Nathan of Voice370. She is a representative of that family support group. Okay, so let's hear from Minister Leo. Okay, we're back on Radio Espial, and I'm joined by Grace Nathan. Grace, you're very welcome. How are you?
Fine, thank you, and thank you for having me.
No problem. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I know we've been trying to arrange this for a while, and I thought the week that's in it was quite an appropriate week for us to speak. Grace, I just want to go back perhaps to the much earlier days. One of the reasons I wanted to do this interview with you on Radio Espial is because I'm sure you've felt it yourself over the years, that when we talk about the case of MH370, so often the relatives are not the focus. It's the plane, it's the search, it's the Malaysian government, it's the investigation. And this was one of the important things why I wanted to have a relative on, so we could see things from the viewers and the listeners could see things from the perspective of a relative. I think the most important thing is I want to focus on your mother, who you lost in this tragedy, and Daisy. Let's just paint a picture of your mother and just tell us a little bit about your mother.
Well, my mother was a very happy, cheerful person, and she was always the light of the home. Like, she was always the one that everyone went to. She was the one that held us together, the glue that kept all of us together. Mm-hmm. She was the spirit of Christmas. Like, she would be the one to decorate the house, to do everything. So she was just like that generally in life. She was always there for us. She was always the one that was present. My dad was always away, always traveling. So in a lot of ways, she was the only present parent we had. Mm-hmm. And so when me and my sister and I, so we're both very, very close to her. And she, although she was very small in stature, she was barely 5 feet tall, and she was very petite, but she had like a lot of strength and a lot of courage, and she would always give us strength to do everything that we wanted to do. Any dream we had was her dream as well. Anything we wanted to do, helped us achieve.
Let's go back to that weekend of March 2014. Now, I'm recalling previous interviews and some maybe private discussions that we've had as well over time. You weren't actually in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia at the time. You were actually in the UK, weren't you, studying?
Yes, I was. I was in the final semester of my bar school because I was studying to be a lawyer. So I was becoming a barrister, and I received the phone call really late at night. It was past midnight in England when my dad called, and I had just come back from the library, and he sounded really shaken. He sounded really scared, and I'd never heard my dad like that. And
Sure.
all he asked me, and the first thing he asked me was, when is your next exam? And it was Friday going on Saturday at the time, and I told him my next exam was on Monday. And he said, okay, take the next flight and come home. And I was like, why? What happened? He's like, don't ask me any questions. Just do as I tell you. And my first thought was that maybe something happened to my grandmother, because my grandmother had been in hospital.
Okay.
And that was why my mom had actually delayed her flight by a week. She was supposed to have flown to China a week before. But then I thought about it for a while, and I thought, I don't think my dad would be that upset if something had happened to my mom's mom.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
So I started becoming very worried, because at that moment it occurred to me that something must have happened either to my mother or my sister for my dad to be that shaken up. And then he called me back a little while later, and I kept pestering him. I kept asking him. He called to ask if I'd already bought my ticket, and I kept telling him, no, I'm looking online now.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, I think you need to come back. And I kept asking him why. Eventually he said, something happened to the plane your mother was on, but we don't know what happened. And I remember at that point, like my whole world just became dark. I dropped the phone, and I didn't even buy my ticket. I just took my passport, and I just took my handbag, and I walked
straight
up
to
the
the
house.
airport.
Yeah, because I was in Bristol, so I went straight to the coach station and got on the first coach to Heathrow and just went to the airport.
That plane journey to Kuala Lumpur can't have been an easy one, because it's a long journey.
Yeah, I was on a direct flight, and the flight must have been about 14 hours. And I remember it was like such a long, long time to be cut off from the world, because I remember all the 3-hour bus journey from Bristol to Heathrow. I was refreshing my Google newsfeed like every 10 seconds to see if there was information about the plane. And in all of this time, like, I remember that we hadn't been able to reach my sister, who was probably still asleep, because it was really early in the morning in Malaysia. And it was a Saturday morning. And I think at some point on my journey, my sister woke up, and I told her like something had happened. And the first thing she said to me was, don't lie. And I told her, no, just Google it. And then I think then she was in a panic state as well. And then it was difficult, not just to be cut off from the news, but also to be cut off from my family, to not be able to talk to anyone, to just not know what was happening. Because for me, 14 hours was such a long time. Anything could have happened. They could have found that the plane had crashed, or they could have found the plane ended somewhere. And, there were so many possibilities, and I just could not relax on that flight. My mind was going to a million places, hoping for the best, but, still thinking about the worst. And when we landed, I remember, I couldn't even wait for the plane to, start taxiing. The minute it hit the ground, I took my seatbelt off, and I wanted to get up and run out of the plane. The minute it stopped, the first thing I did was I ran to the front, and I said, is there any news? Is there any news? Because, when the minute they opened the door, someone had, from the outside had come in, a steward had come in, someone had been waiting for me to arrive, because my dad had informed them that I was on that flight.
Yeah.
And I remember the first thing saying, is there any news? And he said, no, there isn't any news, and actually felt somewhat relieved, because at that point in time, no news could possibly still be good news.
Right, I suppose at that stage, in a sense, one can understand you now have hundreds of relatives now involved in this, and they're all thinking the same thing probably as well, that maybe no news is good news, that there's just been some sort of mistake made.
Yeah, or maybe everyone's alive, maybe they've landed somewhere, they could all just be survived, they could all have survived. So yeah, that was it was a really rough time. And I remember every hour that passed by, all we were doing was just sitting glued in front of the television, watching the news updates. And they had gathered all the family members in a hotel in Malaysia. And I remember going from the airport straight to the hotel just to update the contact information so that they could contact us if they found anything. And the place was chaos. There was so much of press. And it was at that point that my dad decided that we wouldn't stay at that hotel. We would just stay at home. And since there was so much,
I suppose it's a big choice, and I would imagine that all of those families from China, Malaysia, Australia, wherever, they were all making similar choices. Where do we want to be? Do we want to be, close to the family support centres that I suppose were in process of being set up? Do the do they want to be housed in a hotel? Would they rather be at home with their own family, looking at it from their perspective of TV? So that has to be tough for all families in a tragic situation, regardless of what it is.
And I think for a lot of people, I mean, now that we're friends with everyone, like it boiled down to how close they lived. So for the family who lived close by, it was okay to stay at home because if any news came up, they would just be able to drive to the support center, be there in an hour or so. But for the families that lived far away or from overseas, it made more sense for them to just be there so that they would get live updates, so that they would know something happened. And bearing in mind that at this point in time, we knew absolutely nothing. We didn't know the place was around. We didn't know anything. So at that point in time, like, it was crucial to receive information. And I mean, I guess my family was in a slightly better position because of the position my father was in, because my father worked for the Department of Civil Aviation in Malaysia. So we were also being informed by his colleagues what was going on, what was happening. But I cannot imagine what it would have been like for like the other families who were completely in the dark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose as well, from that perspective of the position that your dad was in, there must have been other families who may have started to know the position your dad held and must have been putting him under pressure, as if to say, look, come on, you must know more than they're telling us, or an awful situation.
I think initially, like, our family, and especially my dad, stayed far away from all the press, specifically because he was in this sensitive position, so nobody knew. And I think it was much later on that when my dad went to one of the briefings, and this I think was after the Malaysian Prime Minister made the announcement that the plane had ended in the South Indian Ocean. And I think they had a briefing for the families, and my father attended that briefing, and that was the first time a lot of the family members saw him, and no one knew what he did.
This would have been about 2 weeks, I think, roughly 2 weeks after the initial plane went missing.
2 to 3 weeks after, and he had asked a lot of technical questions at the briefing, and I think that made a lot of the family members curious. They were like, "Oh, who is this guy? Why is he asking these questions? How does he know these things?" So I think then he was approached, and I'm not sure exactly what he said or who he told, but I mean, along the way, everyone knew. But it's really nice that everyone respected that he wanted to remain like private, that he didn't want everyone to know his position. And I know there was a huge press piece that came out sometime before the first remembrance event, the first anniversary of the disappearance, that sort of announced his position in all of this, like his professional position, and that was unintended. And then since then, it's not a secret anymore.
At that time, to bring us up to that 3 week point, the essentially what we would call the initial sea surface search had gone from where generally the aircraft was last disappeared from secondary radar past the Agari waypoint in the South China Sea. It then kind of shifted all over the place. We suddenly we were in the Andaman Sea, up the Malacca Strait, and then that bombshell from the Prime Minister. No, actually, we're confident with this information we have that it's in the southern Indian Ocean. That must have come as an extraordinary shock. Well, I suppose to all of us, but in particular family members, as to what on earth is it doing in the southern Indian Ocean? It was going to Beijing.
Yeah, and I think for me at that point in time, one of the most shocking realizations was that when my dad made that phone call to me saying that the plane did not land, it's missing.
It was still in the air. It's incredible.
And that was like a devastating revelation, is that like, and then you find out that the Malaysian military saw the plane. You find out that DCA found out, like nothing was done, no protocol was followed, and you wonder if like all the neighboring countries were alerted, would someone have picked it up, would someone have seen it? And you know that maybe this could have been prevented, or at least we would have known where the plane ended its journey, and like so many things could have been different.
In general, and I know you're involved in Voice370 with several other key next of kin. Just we'll talk about Voice 370 a little bit, but just I suppose how it came about, because essentially, as I say, you were all struggling for your information. The information seemed to switch and change. We were told one thing one day, then something different the next day. It was a complete roller coaster. So, just first of all, your thoughts on, and I'm sure this will help us perhaps in the future, God forbid, other air accidents happen. That how we actually deal with family relatives in a situation like that. And clearly it wasn't easy for all of you. What kind of, I'm not asking you to rate the support, but let's look on a more positive way. What would you have liked to have happened during those first few weeks that wasn't happening?
Well, I think that, Malaysia, I suppose they have the Montreal Convention, which sort of lays out what you should do for the families of victims and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think this being unprecedented, Malaysia being unprepared, they just didn't know how to handle something like this. They had no crisis management team in place. They just didn't know what to do. And although there are protocols that are set out, especially for situations like this, where, there may be a period where it takes time before the plane is located, takes time before there's any search and rescue or search and recovery, and in this interim period, there are certain things, there's certain step-by-step procedures laid down, or certain recommendations in place to deal with this sort of thing, including providing counseling, advancing some sort of compensation to sort of help in the initial aftermath. And also because from a legal perspective, because I'm a lawyer and I can a while before you recognize someone as they're dead, because you can't really start any procedure because people are just missing until you then go through some sort of court process to declare them dead, because in our case, no bodies were recovered. So it was an unnatural thing. And for legally, it usually wait 7 years for someone to be missing before you say they're dead or assume they're dead. Or
officially dead, yeah.
So in our case, for a lot of the families who lost the sole breadwinner of their family, had no access to the accounts or the banks, and what would they have done in this interim period? It took more than a year for anyone to possibly start probate, because the government had to declare everyone dead.
And I think on a basic human level, and I'm particularly conscious of some of the stories I heard directly from some of the Chinese relatives who were often living out in quite remote areas. This wasn't something you could just hop on a plane every week and get an update from what was happening in Kuala Lumpur. They had to go to Beijing. They were traveling for hours to get to the family support center that was set up there. And of course, these were, I suppose, like in any country, the family unit is very important. And suddenly, there's no mother in the family unit. There's no father in the family unit. And these can often be essentially what we call the breadwinners. Essentially, there's no income coming to that family in those first few weeks as well. Again, horrifying stories that, we need to do better to support families, and we need to have a plan there that can immediately be implemented. Talk to me then, sorry, if you want to say something.
I think for China, a lot of it was they were extra devastated because they have the single child policy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the families only had one child. And if they lost that one child, that was the whole legacy of their family gone. Yeah. So, for them, and there was an added element of pain that I think a lot of us don't understand, because that one child, the only child that they can have, is so precious to them. But also in terms of relief and help, I think that having counselors immediately available, having a good communication system. I don't necessarily think having everyone grouped together where all of the press is and why all of this is not necessarily helpful. In fact, it can be very traumatic.
No. We clearly saw visual images of how traumatic it was. And perhaps, I know the, Malaysians and Chinese authorities came under a lot of criticism, but I can understand after a certain point, after those first 2 or 3 weeks, there was a certain point where, you've got to say, we can't all gather here, hundreds of people, families, indefinitely at some point, because this doesn't look like there's going to be resolution very soon. So to a degree, I could understand. And of course, the whole media bandwagon became utter lunacy. We saw the likes of CNN. Virtually, it became CNN MH370 for I think something extraordinary that we've never seen with a TV network, almost for 2 solid months, and just endlessly talking about the same things, and of course the lack of information. Just we touched on Voice 370. Tell me a little bit about how Voice 370 came about.
So what actually happened was people reached out to us, families from other air crashes. I think one in particular that stood out was from a German air crash, and it was a German family, and also from the French air crash from a few years ago.
Air France 447, yeah.
Yeah, Air France, and they reached out to us and they told us that, this is not something you can think about now, but it is something that will be useful moving forward, and this is our advice to you, that you should set up a family support group, an association from which you can speak with one voice. And we found that it was very effective for us, and it's also a support group. It's also something that you will rely on for each other and that sort of thing. And that is how Voice 370 came about.
And I think it's very important, because I know as well, even gone back quite some years, the families of Swiss Air 111 also did something like this. And I think from what the feedback I get from families who go through something like this, almost part of their life becomes about assisting someone else who finds themselves in their position. They know what they're going through, and they can identify and say, look, this is what you need to do. This is the best way to deal with this. This is the best way to handle the media. This is, there are positive things that can come out of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that Voice 370 or the next of kin, the families in general, have some say in everything that goes on. And people do want to hear our side of the story or our point of view. And the fact that we can all speak with one voice is important. It does carry some weight. And I think that it has definitely helped keep this cause alive. I really think that things could be far worse if we were not as vocal as we were.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll touch on one or two things that I think Voice 370 did that may not have happened had it not been for the increased pressure that you constantly kept on. Let's just touch on some of those things, because this whole tragedy has taken you to many parts of the world. One of we'll talk in a second about the visit that you made to Australia to I think it was Perth, when you were invited by the ATSB to take a look at what Fugro was doing in that larger 120,000 square kilometre search that essentially went on for nearly 2.5-3 years. But you also went to I think it was places like Mauritius, Madagascar, and that was to raise awareness. Just tell us a little bit about why you were there, and for our listeners and viewers, why you went there, and specifically what that was about. This was about as debris started to turn up on the East African coast.
Yeah, so how that came about was because we saw that Alan Gibson, who is this private citizen, had been traveling, based on the research done by Professor Chari, had been traveling to the Western Indian Ocean to look for debris. He had been successful, and he had only gone to one area. He kept going back to the same stretch, the same beach. And on that beach alone, he had found maybe 2 or 3 pieces of debris. I mean, only one has been identified, but he still found several pieces of debris. And we thought that, well, if he's one person looking and he found a few of these pieces, try and go and raise awareness. And we did raise this through many press statements. We encouraged the government through intergovernment connections and channels, to encourage the governments in these countries to just broadcast over the radio, or to basically inform and educate the public about what might be happening, and basically to help the public be on the lookout, especially the tourists who holiday on these beaches.
Sure, and what to be looking out for, because obviously in a situation like that, and
at this stage there was particularly one piece of debris that had been left there for months, and then Malaysia it kept saying, oh, we're sending someone, oh, we've sent someone, but the debris just wasn't getting picked up, and we were starting to become concerned. And just a couple of months prior to our trip to Africa, when we were in Australia, we met personally with Professor Chari. We spoke to him personally. He explained the mapping to us. He explained the science behind it. We were confident in what he explained to us. And then Blaine had also found something. So there was more than one reason why we felt like, yes, we should go there. But the main purpose was not to go on a debris hunt by ourselves, but the purpose was to make sure that the eyes of the people who live and work on those islands, who holiday on those islands, were kept peeled for any possible pieces of debris.
Right, and anything that looks unusual, because they would be more familiar with the area, particularly, native people living in an area will notice something that doesn't, well, that's not ordinary beach sort of rubbish, that we normally see.
Yeah, and we were aware that we were going to a place where it was quite underdeveloped, where we would have language barriers because the two countries were French-speaking mostly. And among us, none of us was French-speaking. We had one French NOK who came along, but he wasn't going to be with each of us during the whole trip because we had to split up to cover as much ground as possible.
Right,
so,
Geislin?
Yeah, Ghislaine.
Yeah, Ghislaine.
So, we were not all going to be together all the time, of course, but it helped having him there. So before we went, I remember spending days and hours just going on Facebook and adding every single community-based group in Madagascar, talking to everyone, trying to say like, oh, we're coming from this date to this date. Could you help us? Could you give us some tips? Could you tell us who we could get in touch with? And, just basically, just clawing around, hoping, that someone somewhere would respond and say, yes, I know this person that you can get in touch with. I know this person that will help you. And as we were especially trying very hard to get in touch with the press, and we were eventually, like, just through these Facebook connections and like talking to everyone, I was introduced to a couple of journalists, and these journalists, people who had friends who were journalists, and through these couple of journalists, we managed to spread the word that we were coming and that we would want to hold a press conference. And to our utter amazement, our press conference was very well attended. And we had Ghislaine do the French portion, and we did the English portion. And we also had a couple of international reporters who had come to cover our journey. So we had the wires, like routers and stuff there, who carried the news to all of the other major broadcasting networks.
And that awareness certainly, helped to identify and find debris, because essentially, suddenly, what started happening was it wasn't just Blaine Allen Gibson finding debris. We had Liam Lauder. I think we had Niels, who was an archaeologist. I think we had quite enough. I think we had another tourist couple who started. So suddenly it was ordinary people finding debris.
Yeah, and also while we were there and we branched out to the smaller cities and towns, we were met by the village chiefs. We went to the tourism authorities, to the fishing authorities, who said they would put our brochures in. They were giving out little packs to all the fishermen. They had started this initiative where they would give the men a little pack a waterproof bag, which they could put their belongings in when they went out fishing. And they said they would put a brochure in all of those for the fishermen to be on the lookout for debris. And we were overwhelmed by the amount of support we received. And we went to a lot of these smaller islands where a lot of the people lived in very meager conditions. Like they didn't really have electricity or running water, but their hearts were so open to wanting to help. And I'm sure that they've probably never really been in a plane or may never be in a plane or not understand the gravity of the situation, but they were so willing to help. And they said that they would return anything that they found to the fishermen, who would take it to the main island to pass it to the police station. And even after we came back, the response was good. We heard from a lot of mostly local tourists, because we did reach out to a lot of the tourism agencies who sent out these brochures, to the digital copies of the brochures to all of the hotels on the island. So when we went back to our own hotel, we found that they'd already printed the brochure and stuck it up on the notice board and were handing it out to some of the guests so that the guests could be out. And it was really we were all very touched by these gestures. And a lot of the tourists did write back saying that, they would be on the lookout. We even got a lot of photographs, and a lot of the time it was boat debris, but it was good that people were actually taking it seriously, taking our efforts seriously.
Absolutely. I know as well you had in some of those packs as well, you had a fact sheet, because so often we experience this through social media. You know, I'm heavily involved with social media, and I've worked with some of you to try and put the word out, and so often we would get back news of somebody in wherever it was, Tanzania or Mauritius or South Africa, who would say, oh, I actually picked up a piece of debris on the bit and thought it was a bit unusual, and it was sitting in my shed for the last 2 months. I didn't know what to do with it. And it was, as you say, it was getting that awareness, say, with a point by point what to do. You know, contact the local police authorities, you know, get them to contact the civil aviation authority of that country, who in turn can contact the civil aviation authority in either Australia or Malaysia, you know. So it was that process of, you know, because so often people just didn't know what to, or didn't realise what they actually had, but just knew it was something odd.
And we were also able to go on all the radio stations who agreed to play the sort of like a commercial.
Yeah.
To just play our brief 2 or 3 minutes explaining what we would like them to do over and over again for a couple of months so that everyone would hear it. So, I mean, the response we got was really, really, I mean, I cannot explain. It was overwhelming, and we were so touched to be met by so many people, and so many people cared, and they were taking everything we said so seriously. And we realized that people are so concerned, and like we were at that point in time, I think, very disappointed at our government that we had to go and do this, that
Right.
we had to travel all of this way on our own money to do something that they could have done so easily, just maybe with a phone call.
Yeah. You also were invited to meet the ATSB, who essentially at that stage were handling the Frugo, the contract for the Frugo search, and of course we know that's gone on for.
We asked them if we could come.
Right. Okay.
And they agreed. Yeah, because we were trying very, very hard to get in touch with the Malaysian government for a sit down, for a discussion, and we were just being stonewalled and at this stage it had already been over 2 years. So we reached out to the Australians, who said, sure, come. We'll let you know when the ship is next coming to port. Come see the ship, and then come up to Canberra. We'll take you to the lab so you can see the flapper on, and you can talk to the people. We'll show you what we're doing and how we're doing it and all of that. And we'll explain everything to you. You can ask any questions you like. And then while we were in Perth, we also met Professor Chari. We also met Duncan Steele.
Yeah, Duncan Steele, from the IG.
And so we met a couple of these experts from from different universities, who also explained a lot of scientific stuff to us. And it was a very good trip because we learned a lot. And the crew, seeing how hard they work, gave us a much deeper appreciation and a better understanding of the complexity of the search. I think we were on the ship for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and the ship was obviously bobbing because it was on the water. And I remember all of us had a mild headache by the time we got off the ship.
So you can imagine when you're out for 3 or 4 weeks on a ship like that.
The waves are like 6-7 meters high, and they told us a lot of them don't even sleep in their room. They sleep in the rec room, which is a room that's really at the furthest bottom of the ship. It's usually where they sit and watch TV or eat something, and a lot of them sleep on the chairs there because that's the place where you feel the least of the bobbing, I suppose. Right. And you know, like, it would just put a lot of things into perspective for us, and the fact that a lot of people work such long shifts, like the people who sit and monitor what the toefish is watching, they do 12 hours. So they work like 12 hours non-stop and then rest for a while, come back, work 12 hours.
And being a monitor has to be intense work, because you're looking at a screen, you're looking at data, and you can't afford to, because that one thing that you miss, you know, out of 1,000 things you look at that day.
Yeah, it could cause the toefish to crash. It could cause damage to the toefish, and that would mean like the search would get delayed because that one and only toefish would need to be repaired and then remobilized. And so, I mean, it was really a good eye-opening experience for us, and we saw how cheerful everyone was, and we saw a lot of concern, and you know, that they were doing their job. They were so dedicated. Like, it really helped to know that, to see some faces at the other end of the search.
And I think that's one of the important things, because I know, of course, we've all been very frustrated you know, with the Malaysian government, and yeah, look, at times with the Australian government as well. But I think for everybody, you know, who wants to theorise or do whatever they want, or whatever, however way they feel involved and follow this, I think we've got to keep remembering that the vast majority of people involved in this are ordinary men and women being paid to do a job and do it as professionally as possible. They are not the people at the top part of the pyramid, the sort of the policy makers, the government ministers. They are the people lower down who are day to day doing this work, doing.
And like, I think it just gave us a very deep sense of appreciation. Like, we didn't take it for so much for granted as we did, the complexity, how difficult it is, how much time it takes, how much effort. And of course, you know, we met the Australian people. They were so passionate. They, you know, we really felt confident in what they were saying. We felt that they cared. Because a lot of the time when you're here and all you hear is on the news, you don't have personal contact with these people. You cannot put a face to these names. You just wonder how sincere they are. Do they really care? Do they really know how hard it is for us without any information, just waiting like this? And having met them, we felt their dedication. We saw the passion that they had. And, you know, like, we just felt so much more confidence in the whole search.
Ultimately, the Fugro searched. They reached an end. Essentially, the Australian were tasked with carrying out the search with a Fugro. That ultimately came to an end. They searched the entire 120,000 kilometre area and said, no, we can't find it. And then that was... January 2017, that was it. Then that had to be a body blow for the relatives to say that that's it now. Nobody's looking now. You know, we're not going to find it if we're not looking.
Yeah, that was horrible for us, and we sort of felt that it was drawing to a close, and we felt Malaysia not really making any effort to, you know, like, resume the search, because we thought that after the first principles review with this 25,000 square kilometers recommended by the Australians, that they might say, fine, just search, because the ship's already here, the ship's already mobilized, people are already here, let's just continue. Because that would make so much more sense than, you know, like, demobilizing the ship and then, like, remobilizing it again.
And it takes so much time. And of course, everything is always weather orientated and seasonally orientated when you can search.
Exactly. So, like, we saw that they were not doing that, and so we sort of had a feeling that the search might be suspended, and it was right before the 3-year mark. So we decided,
right, March.
Yeah, so what we decided was, as the family members, was that we would try to assemble a team on our own, and then if we could assemble a team and we could have a plan in place, then we would start some sort of fund that would try to fund our own search. Like, we were willing to go to such lengths.
Essentially an independent search of your own.
Yeah, and this was all because we felt that them suspending the search at that stage was premature, because 3 years on, they had so much more information than they had.
They were in a far better position.
They had the debris, they had so much more. I mean, technology must have improved in the 3 years. They must have gone somewhere. And then they come up with this 25,000. Ridiculous that they would just be like, oh, you know what, we won't put any faith in the team that we appointed.
Yeah. And
we would discard the information that they have found, or the results that they have found, and the recommendations they have made. They were essentially saying, the people we appointed, well, the evidence that they have produced, or the recommendations
is not credible. We heard this line over and over again, you know, the need for credible information leading to a precise location of the aircraft, and of course it was complete round of it.
Yeah, and they wanted to find the plane before they wanted to search for it.
Yeah.
And then they never gave us a definition of what credible was. Everything was so vague. So, I mean, we were left in this devastating position, and we did, in fact, start speaking to people, start thinking about assembling a team. And then we heard very early on about this Ocean Infinity offer.
You spoke about it. I just wanted to clarify this. I think you said it was around about the 3rd anniversary, and I don't know whether, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, whether it was Minister Lowe who was present at the gathering in Kuala Lumpur for the 3rd anniversary, and whether he meant to say it or let it slip, but indicated that a company or someone had actually approached them and suggested they would be interested in searching, and this was kind of the first. This kind of takes us to where we are now, but just talk to me about that and just clarify that to me.
So basically, like, we heard as well, and I really can't remember for the life of me where we got this information from, but we heard that there was this company that offered to search for free or a no cure, no fee basis, basically. And so, initially we were like, oh, is this offer really on the table? Is this really happening? And then I think like a few more months down the road, I mean, we were hoping that the negotiations were taking place and
something
things like
must
that.
be happening, and every month goes by, there'll be an announcement at some stage, and then nothing. So kind of around August, wasn't it, you decided, no, we've got to up the pressure here. What's going on?
So basically for the first 2 or 3 months, like after the remembrance event, we were planning on our side, like trying to start up a group, and we were talking to people. David Merns is one of them. We were speaking to all of these people about sort of putting a group together.
Yeah.
And then I think it came out in the press that there were these offers from a few companies or something like that. And then I remember we sent out a series of press releases about how come they haven't taken this offer. And then we found out that the offer had been on the table for 3 months and then 6 months. And then like until very recently. And for like, I think the last 2 or 3 months, they've been talking about the agreement, talking about finalizing the agreement, and here we are saying like, oh look, it's summer already, like when are you going to start? And even recently, like 2 or 3 days ago, the families were briefed by DCA the day before they signed the contract, and they told us that the offer has been on the table for a year.
Yeah, it's utterly crazy. And we also found out, of course, that even Fugro had gone back to the Malaysian government and the DCA and said, look, we're here, we've already done it, we're willing to go again if you want us to.
And exactly, and the Malaysian government kept a tight lid on everything, didn't tell us anything as usual. Ocean Infinity did not contact the families in any way. And I think we heard about Fugro in the news, everything we hear about in the news through the press, through someone leaks something somewhere. And up to some point, I didn't even know where I get all the information from, but I know it's not from the government.
Yeah.
So, and that has been sort of like the story of MH370 for all of us, like just not knowing anything and forever being in the dark and forever like trying to bark up every tree we can find, hoping for answers.
So we are where we are now. Essentially, the contract is now signed, formally signed. We witnessed that a couple of days ago on Wednesday. Your thoughts on Ocean Infinity? Certainly, I had question marks over Ocean Infinity, probably like you, that I didn't really know much about this company and the background. The more and more information I've got, the more and more impressed. One thing that has struck me in the past several weeks is that there is a genuine positivity and confidence this time that even wasn't present in the first year of the Fugro search.
Yeah, I feel like Ocean Infinity, for whatever reason, is feeling very confident. I do know that they did consult with a team of experts, the independent experts from the independent group. They had a meeting, they sat down, and I think they themselves are confident in the recommendations by the Australians. And for their own reasons, maybe with their own experts, maybe they find the calculations sound, maybe they find the science sound, maybe they find the research and the theory that led them to recommend this current 25,000 square kilometer area a sound decision.
Yeah.
I think they're confident because, I mean, for them, it's also an exercise that money will be spent. So if they don't find the plane, then they don't get anything.
And so, we know they have it in divisions as well. They've also indicated that there seems to be a willingness to search that entire 25,000 square kilometer area, and if willing and if time allows, even push further. So again, it looks positive. We can't do any more other than, I think I said this to someone last night, look, one of the most positive things about this isn't going to take a year, 2 years, 3. We aren't going to be waiting the way we were before. This is going to happen quite rapidly. The efficiency of Ocean Infinity's equipment, the 8 Hugans that they have, is going to quite rapidly get through the area. So
the first 25,000 square kilometers is going to take them about 26 days.
Yeah.
Essentially less than a month, and I think that's very, very, very fast compared to what we've been used to.
Which is extraordinary.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, the equipment looks very, very impressive. But, for us as family members, as much as we're so grateful that the search is back on again, like, it's so difficult for us to be equally hopeful or equally optimistic, because in the past we've just been disappointed at every turn. It's just been a very journey for us, and it's so hard for us to just be like, yeah, this is it, that they're going to find the plane. And at the same time, like, it's difficult to be excited because this is not really something that we want. Like, on the one hand, you want it found, but on the other hand,
I understand, because it opens up a whole new chapter.
Yeah, and like, am I really ready for this devastation, or like having to accept this that I have not really fully accepted for the last 4 years? I'm probably less in denial now than I was initially, but I don't think there has been any form of acceptance, like complete acceptance. Like, any acceptance is minimal, partial at best. And like, I think that is going to be like a whole another ball game, and no one can possibly say I'll be so excited if they find the plane. Like, that's not really true for us, but it needs to be found, and only then the healing can begin. Only then, like, that journey, that grieving can properly happen, and then hopefully we can attain closure at some point.
Resolution and solutions to what happened, flight MH370. Grace, Nathan, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I wish you very well.
Thank you.
And I hope we will have positive news soon.
Yes.
Take care, Grace.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Radio Espial, a series of podcasts brought to you across the internet by TIPM Media and presented by investigative journalist Mick Rooney. Please feel free to leave a comment and visit our links provided in this podcast production. Thank you for your support.
Thank you again for joining us for this episode. Radio Espial is a global internet broadcast with audio and video. Our focus is on media and how it deals with news. Our core areas will always be aviation, publishing, technology and other things considered when it's significant in the media news. Thanks again for Grace, Nathan joining us for an excellent interview. We obviously at Radio Espial wish all the crew and the people involved in the current search for Malaysia Airlines and the seabed wreckage at Ocean Infinity the very best. We'll catch up and we'll keep you obviously updated. You can catch us on www.radioespial.com and our social media links, which we'll include in this podcast and videocast. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you again hopefully very soon for episode 8. Thank you.